How are you feeling? Have you had a moment to reflect on everything? I stood there, face to face with my husband, the man who had thrown me out of the house for blindly believing his stepchild's lies. An air of superiority surrounded him. He looked down on me as if he knew it all. I couldn't help but laugh. Reflect? No, not a bit, I told him calmly, pulling a stack of papers from my bag. Sign here, please. It was the divorce papers and the legal documents my lawyer had prepared that I handed him. He kept his composure, signing them without a single protest, until he saw the attached documents. His expression froze then, his hand trembling just slightly. Beside him, his stepchild Jim started to panic. The lies they had built so carefully were exposed. The truth was now laid completely bare. My name is Mary. I'm 52 years old, an office worker married for just a year. I had been living with my husband Brian and his adult son Jim, who worked full-time yet refused to leave the house he grew up in. I never adopted Jim, so to me, he was little more than a stranger. From the very start, I hoped he would move out, but Jim dug his heels in. This was his mother's house, he said firmly. She died 5 years ago, and he wouldn't leave the home he'd shared with her. I sympathized, having lost my first husband around the same time Jim's mother passed away. But that sympathy didn't make his defiance any easier to live with. My mom was a better cook, Jim muttered one evening, picking at the dinner I had prepared with clear disdain. He never hid his contempt. It weighed on me every single day. If my cooking was so unbearable, why didn't he just make his own meals? Frustrated, I went to my husband. Jim clearly doesn't like my cooking. What should I do? Brian just shrugged. Then stop cooking for him. He doesn't have to eat it. The indifference stung, but I took his advice. The next time Jim came home to no dinner, he exploded. Why isn't there any food for me? You married my dad, so it's your job to cook for me too. No matter what I did, I couldn't win. Jim's comments only grew nastier, and with Brian's refusal to intervene, I felt completely and utterly alone. Before we married, Brian had assured me Jim would move out soon. Yet here we were. Jim showed no signs of leaving. He just can't afford it, Brian claimed. But I knew better. Jim had inherited a substantial estate from his late mother, and squandered most of it on luxury items. His debts piled up, evident from the letters from credit card companies stuffed in his room. He wasn't just reckless with money. He was openly dismissive of me. And Brian, he just enabled it. One day my daughter Emma shared her news. Mom, I got proposed to. Hearing her excitement, I couldn't help but smile. Since my remarriage, good news had been rare. So this was a moment of pure joy. Congratulations, I exclaimed warmly. I'm sure your father in heaven is smiling too. Memories of my late husband filled my mind. He had worried about our daughter's future until his final moments. I felt certain he would be so relieved to see her find happiness. I'll introduce my fiancé soon, Emma said, then hesitated. But do I have to introduce him to Brian? He's just your second husband. He has nothing to do with me. Her words were honest, and I couldn't blame her. Unlike Jim, she hadn't been adopted by Brian. She had no bond with him at all. Just greet him briefly, I suggested gently. Doesn't have to be more than that. When I told Brian about Emma's engagement, he barely reacted. His indifference hurt, but it didn't surprise me. He had never shown much interest in Emma. Later, Jim sneered, why don't you just divorce Dad and go live with your daughter? You probably hate living with us anyway. Shocked, I looked at Brian for support, but as usual, he walked out without a single word. Annoyed, I snapped back at Jim. Don't you have someone special in your life? Why don't you get married and give your father some peace? Jim scowled and walked away without an answer. He rarely spoke of relationships, and I doubted he had anyone in his life. The thought of him marrying and bringing a wife into this house filled me with absolute dread. Do you think Jim will stay here even after marriage? I asked Brian one evening. Leave it to Jim. I don't care either way, he said flatly. His indifference infuriated me. Eventually, I met Emma's fiancé. Brian refused to come. I don't care about that. Don't invite me to the wedding either, he said coldly. Emma's fiancé, however, was the complete opposite of Jim. Mature, kind, responsible. He was around Jim's age, but carried himself with far more grace. You found yourself a great man, I told Emma, sincerely relieved. Compared to him, Jim looked even more pathetic. If things don't work out with your husband and his son, you can always come live with us, her fiancé said kindly. His words gave me a sense of relief I hadn't felt in years. Back at home, Jim greeted me with contempt. A housekeeper shouldn't be late. Dad and I are starving. Hearing him call me a housekeeper stung, but Brian pretended not to notice. Compared to Emma's fiancé, both Brian and Jim seemed utterly useless. Meanwhile, Brian began disappearing every weekend. I'm helping a friend whose mother is in the hospital, he explained. I didn't believe him. When I confronted him, is this friend a woman? He panicked and denied it far too quickly. His behavior only deepened my doubts. Jim noticed the tension and took pleasure in it. Dad probably regrets marrying an old lady like you. Maybe he wishes he'd married someone younger. You're going to get cheated on and kicked out. Poor thing. His words stung because deep down I feared they might be true. Why don't you just give up on Dad and leave before things get messy? Jim added smugly. That was the moment I realized it. I couldn't tolerate this life any longer. I often wondered if Brian intended to replace me with his mistress. Just as I was sinking deeper into my thoughts, Emma called. Mom, I need to talk to you. Can you come over? She asked, her voice serious. Worried, I hurried to her place. Her fiancé Jack was there too. What's the matter? Don't tell me you're calling off the wedding, I said anxiously. They both smiled awkwardly. Why would we cancel the wedding? This is about you, not us, Emma explained. Relieved, I was still caught off guard by their next revelation. Jack showed me his phone and asked, Is this your husband, Brian? At first I didn't recognize him, but then I noticed the young woman next to him, calling him by name. After examining the photo closely, I realized it was indeed Brian, wearing clothes I had seen before. The photo was taken at a wedding venue. They were discussing their own wedding plans. I was speechless. Brian had no children other than Jim, so the young woman couldn't possibly be his daughter. The unthinkable truth hit me. He was planning to marry someone else while still married to me. That woman looks far too young to be Jim's girlfriend, doesn't she? Emma asked. I recalled Brian's recent suspicious behavior and admitted I've suspected he might be cheating, but I never imagined he'd be with someone so young. Emma and Jack were shocked. I told them everything. Brian's evasive behavior, his frequent absences, and my growing suspicions. Your husband is awful. We need to properly investigate and make sure he takes responsibility, Jack said firmly. You need to divorce him immediately, Mom, Emma added. I agreed but knew we needed solid evidence first. Jack began searching for private investigators. Don't worry about your future, Mom. You can come live with us, he reassured me. Feeling supported, I returned home with a newfound determination. Jim greeted me the way he always did. Hurry up and make dinner. Housekeepers shouldn't be out so late, he said dismissively. His words stung, but I silently prepared dinner. I wouldn't let him see me struggle. Once I had proof of Brian's affair, I would leave. If Brian remarried, Jim would have to rely on his new stepmother, and I knew he couldn't treat her the same way he treated me. When Brian came home, I decided to test him. Will you be attending our daughter's wedding? They're having it at a prestigious venue, I said casually, mentioning the name of the venue from the photo. His face stiffened for a moment before he denied knowing the place. That reaction confirmed my suspicions, but I didn't press further. Then Brian changed the subject. Jim hasn't asked you for money, has he? He's been struggling financially. I shook my head. Jim had never asked me for money. He only saw me as a housekeeper. He's been pestering me despite inheriting a large sum from his mother. He blew it all and now he's asking me for help, Brian continued. I thought of the debt collection notices I had seen while cleaning Jim's room, but I stayed quiet. I couldn't bring myself to confide in Brian, not when he was likely cheating. Besides, I feared Jim's reaction if he knew I discovered his debts. Housekeeper or not, I haven't heard anything about that, I said instead. Brian sighed. Can't you talk to him? Tell him to stop wasting money. I was stunned. Jim doesn't listen to me. You're his father. You should talk to him. But Brian kept pushing. Don't be so cold, please. I'm not good at dealing with tough conversations. His insistence only deepened my disappointment. The next day he pressed again. Have you talked to Jim about the money yet? What did he say? When I told him I hadn't, Brian grew angry. What are you doing? You need to talk to him right away. Fed up with his nagging, I decided to focus entirely on gathering evidence of his affair. Once I had it, I would finally be free of both Brian and Jim. Reluctantly, I approached Jim. Your father is worried about your spending. He asked me to remind you to be more careful with money. I tried to sound neutral, but Jim exploded. Who do you think you are, housekeeper? It's my money, and I'll spend it however I want. None of your business. I saw then why Brian avoided this conversation. Jim was impossible. Still, I couldn't help but wish Brian, as his father, would handle it. Instead, he ignored his son's flaws and chased after his mistress. Jim glared at me with pure hatred. I'll get you kicked out of this house. Just wait. His words stung, but I reminded myself, once I had proof of Brian's infidelity, I would leave on my own terms. A few days later, Emma called. Mom, we have the proof. Can you meet us at a restaurant? My heart sank. Was it true? Did he really cheat on me? Emma's voice was firm. Yes. He's been seeing a woman much younger than you. They're even looking for a new house together. Jack handed me the investigation report, filled with undeniable photos of Brian and his mistress. You need to divorce him right away, Jack advised. This woman is suspicious. She spends extravagantly and might be seeing other men besides your husband. She could be planning to take his money and leave him. Hearing this, I realized how deeply Brian had fallen into her schemes. They had even visited a wedding venue. She might have already taken money for preparations, too. I knew I had to act quickly. When I returned home, Brian and Jim were in the living room. Mary, come here. We need to talk, Brian said sternly. Jim smirked. You've been seeing a younger guy, haven't you? Dad saw you at a restaurant with him. He showed a blurry photo of me with Jack. Caught red-handed. How embarrassing, dating someone the same age as your daughter. That's Emma's fiancé, and she was with us, I said calmly. But Brian wouldn't listen. Jim caught you in the act. You've been cheating on me, haven't you? Leave this house. We'll divorce and talk money later. I almost laughed at his arrogance. All right, I said. I'll leave. We'll discuss divorce and finances later. As I walked to the door, Jim shouted, Make us dinner before you go. I'm hungry. Even then, all he cared about was food. I ignored him and left, heading straight to Emma's house with the investigation report. 3 weeks later, Brian finally contacted me. Let's meet and discuss things at the house. Bring the divorce papers. On the day of the meeting, I arrived with Emma, Jack, and our lawyer. Brian's face paled when he saw us. Why didn't you come alone? He stammered. You never said I had to, I replied. The house was already filthy after only 3 weeks without me. Even with all these people, you'll still pay alimony, Brian sneered. I laughed. I've done nothing wrong. Sign these. I handed him the divorce papers. Brian froze. Why am I paying alimony? You're the one who cheated, he protested, showing the blurry photo again. Our lawyer calmly handed him the investigator's report. We have proof of your affair. Brian's face turned ashen. Jim was speechless. I can't pay alimony. I'm broke. I borrowed money for the wedding and honeymoon, Brian admitted. Jim's true motive slipped out. You're not really remarrying, are you? I don't want to lose half of your inheritance. But Brian shook his head. I already spent all of your mom's inheritance. Jim collapsed in disbelief. Dad, can't you lend me some money? You've got something left, right? I'm broke, Brian whispered. I reminded them both. Jim, I found debt notices in your room. At your age, asking your mother to clean your room is embarrassing. Our lawyer presented the alimony documents, and Brian reluctantly signed them. Jack added, I heard your mistress is spending your money and seeing other men. Brian turned white, frantically trying to call her, but she didn't answer. Mary, I'm sorry. Don't leave us, Jim begged. Dad's never home, and I'm tired of eating junk food. I shook my head. Ask your father's new wife. You'll have a young housekeeper soon enough. And with that, I walked out for the last time. We went straight to City Hall and filed for divorce. I moved in with Emma and Jack. It was a bit cramped, but we planned to move to a larger home soon. A few weeks later, I heard Brian's mistress had scammed him, running off with a large sum of money for a wedding that would never happen. He was left with nothing but debt. Jim even called me begging for help. Mom, Dad moved out and I have nowhere to go. I'm not your mother, I reminded him coldly. We're not related and I've divorced your father. When he kept harassing me, Jack threatened to report him to the police. That finally scared him off. Life with Emma and Jack was peaceful. Soon we received wonderful news. Emma was pregnant. I was thrilled to become a grandmother. For the first time in years, life was finally looking up. And I was determined to cherish every single moment with my loved ones.